Not necessarily knowledgeable.
Well, I never made that. But as a great Cleveland Little once said, I like to keep my audiences riveted.
Well, the 70s, he had something going, and then he just vanished.
Yeah, and then he passed away in the 80s.
Shame.
Yeah. How y'all doing today? It's Sunday morning, I know, bear with us. It's early.
She's probably the most awake of us.
I think so. No?
No?
I've reached the point where I wake up really early,
So those basic elf ears, or are they specific to something?
The horns.
Horns, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You got
We
it.
got them at the Renaissance Festival.
Oh, nice.
Nice. Pennsylvania or Maryland?
Maryland.
Good show. I'll be there in October. Just wandering around. Love that show. Did they do their Renaissance festivals in England?
No, because we actually have history.
Happy there.
I've been taking a French class for the last couple of years, and because this summer we went to a Ren Fair in Tuxedo, New York.
Sure, I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was trying to explain this to my French teacher, who is from Lyon, and he was like, "Yeah, what's a Ren Fair?" I was like, "What's a Ren Fair?" It's like, well, they dress up like, knights and stuff, and then they have like jousting contests and everything. It's like, oh, you mean the weekend?
Yeah, now, before we moved down here, we used to go up to the New York Tuxedo Park Renaissance Fair at least once a summer. Yeah, it was great. The kids, that's where the kids first discovered Ren Fairs. And then we moved to Maryland and just continued.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, great.
And Maryland was cheaper than New York.
Oh, is it?
Oh man, couldn't believe it. It was like $50 a head at the door.
Yeah. That's pretty
And
bad.
then the food was overpriced.
I'm not a turkey leg guy, so I just
Me
couldn't
either.
bring myself to pony up for that. Yeah, I gave my kids some folded money and let them run around like a lunatic.
Sure.
That's what you do.
Did you guys see Vixen's End Card? The three women who did the Shakespeare's in 5 minutes?
No, we didn't.
Oh, they're wonderful. Next year.
We do like Shakespeare.
In 5 minutes?
Well, it's really condensed and really silly, and it's very entertaining because half the time they're making these bawdy jokes and they get people from the audience to participate. They've got it down to a science.
Fun.
Speaking of down to a science, hello.
Show off the typical freelancer method of showing up just a little bit late.
Well, now that you're here, we can get started.
You waited for me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like the good old days. Waiting for you. Where's the script? Yeah. So welcome to our panel on Comics Crossover Crisis. I'm Bob Greenberger, who was a perpetrator in one of the major events. And to my left is Ron Marz, also a fellow co-conspirator.
Hey guys, thanks for coming.
He's more of a dark horse.
I know it's early, so thanks.
To my far right is Mark Buckingham, who is such a talented artist in so many genres and so many different books. We'd be here all hour naming them. And to my right is Jamal Igle, who is an accomplished superhero artist, but does this marvelous stuff on his own for other companies and his own creation.
Yeah.
Right?
Several of them now at this point.
Good times, good stuff. So let me frame things for everybody. The first real crossover was probably when the Submariner and the Human Torch fought each other in a Marvel comic back in the 1940s. And since then, characters have interacted here, there, not in substantive ways, with the exception of the annual crossovers between the Justice League and the Justice Society throughout the 60s and 70s. And that was unique, and it was special, and it was different. But then a couple of things happened in the early 1980s that changed everything. One, Marvel Comics had a deal, I believe it was with Mattel, for a line of action figures that they were calling Secret Wars, and they did a tie-in comic. It was written by Jim Shooter and drawn by Mike Zeck and John Beatty, I think. And it was, had all this stuff that was going to make for great toys. Problem was, Mattel canceled the deal. Shooter has this miniseries sitting on the shelf going, why don't we just publish it? At the same time, in 1981, the letter writer to Green Lantern had some question about the continuity, and Marv said, our continuity is getting a little messed up. And he was talking to Jeanette Kahn about it, who was the president and publisher at the time, and she said, yeah, it'd be really nice if we could streamline it and clean it up, and that got people talking. So Len Wein and Mark Wolfman started figuring out what they could do to streamline DC's continuity. And they spent a year or so talking about it, and the next thing they knew, someone looked at a calendar and said, the 50th anniversary of the company is coming up. This is the event to celebrate the 50 years by collapsing this multiverse into a single universe and a fresh start for the 51st year in the second half of the first century. And they're starting to work on the Crisis Infinite Earths, originally entitled History of the DC Universe. Shooter catches wind of this, says, I got my own crossover, I'll put that out first, which he does, which is pretty much how they came out with their event first, which had Spider-Man in the black suit for the first time, and the Hulk had broken his leg, I think, and there was a new Iron Man armor and a new Spider-Woman.
Thing became human.
Right.
Yeah.
So, there were all these things that was in issue 1, and you had to understand what happened, and then they started doing crossovers. And it really wasn't until Amazing Spider-Man 252 and David Michelinie came up with the idea that the black suit was not just cloth, it was an alien symbiote, and things happened.
And we never heard about that symbiote again.
Thank goodness. So, anyway, that was fundamental, because Secret Wars was 1984, Crisis on Infinite Earths came out in 1985, and each company had their big event, until Crisis sold. And then, in the summer of 1985, at an editorial meeting, Paul Levitz, our then the publisher, sits down and he says, what are we doing next year? Because he saw the budget line, he saw the profits roll in. And that began crossover after crossover after crossover that spilled out in the 80s. It spilled out beyond DC, because First Comics did their crossover, and Eclipse Comics did their crossover, and none of these characters had any business being connected to each other. And everyone was jumping on doing events. Marvel's Mutant Universe had their own events.
Right. And they actually pretty much funded the company for
a
solid decade.
So what have we wrought? Crisis is 39 years old.
Right.
Secret Wars is 40 now. Yeah. What did this do to the business? Talk to me, guys.
Well, the short term, it helped the bottom line. I mean, let's be completely honest. And I think there was always kind of like that childhood hunger that we all have coming up, especially reading superhero comics, where we were I remember when I was a kid, me and my friend Lester were constantly arguing. He was a huge Marvel fan, I was a huge DC fan. We were constantly arguing about the Justice League, Superman, the X-Men, the Avengers, which team was better. We're setting up scenarios, we're drawing our own mini-comics, we're taking our Secret Wars and Superpowers action figures and having them fight. So there's always that desire to have disparate characters interact. But that's not new. If you think about characters like Arsène Lupin meeting Sherlock Holmes, for example. That's a very famous crossover. One of my favorite Batman crossovers is where Sherlock Holmes shows up at the end of the Batman annual, and he's just like, oh my, even Batman's fanboying. It's oh my God, it's Sherlock Holmes. You can't call him Sherlock Holmes. films. But I mean, when you think about it, I mean, there's always been examples of that throughout comics history, even on micro level, even like the independent levels. Like The Rocketeer clearly, very clearly features a crossover with not Doc Savage.
Not Doc Savage, not the Shadow.
Not the Shadow and not Doc Savage.
But I think also, I think it's always been seen as useful to bring characters together so that you benefit from the love that already exists for someone else. Whenever a new book is launched, you look at, in the 70s with characters like Spider-Woman and Captain Marvel and things like, Miss Marvel and books like that. Automatically, issue 2 or issue 3, there's immediately, well, let's throw in an Iron Man or a Captain America or someone that's going to draw audience from elsewhere in the line. And I think crossovers in many ways are just an extension of that. It's like the more we throw in, the more we're scattershot, hoping to hit people who'll try it because their favourite character is in the mix. So I think that's always been a part of it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Did you have a thought?
Not generally, no. I think the storytelling unit of comics used to be monthly books.
Yeah.
When I was reading stuff in the 80s and read Walt's Thor and John Byrne's FF, like you read that book and that's the book you kept up with.
Yeah.
I think in the last 10 years or so, the storytelling unit of comics has turned into the company-wide crossover.
Mm.
Like the monthly titles don't matter as much anymore, except in that they are part of these much larger stories because publishers are trying to get you guys to buy every damn copy that they put out with that.
Well, I usually kind of equate it to like May sweeps, basically.
Yeah.
On television.
But every month is May.
But
now.
every month is May, and that's all we do, which I think, I think, I don't know if you guys know this, but publishers like to make money. And the crossover becomes like, oh, we can generate profits, and we can, a higher tide raises all boats. So like if Supergirl is not selling great, but Supergirl's part of this crossover, the sales on that book are going to go up because it's part of the crossover. But I think, and so ostensibly that's good. Ostensibly that's, the way to get more people reading the books. But I think it also becomes, if you do it too much, it's the comics are great for like, oh, we got a golden goose, let's kill it.
Yeah.
It becomes a jumping off point for people to throw up their arms and go, I can't keep up with all that I've done.
I know a very direct example of this from my own, the early part of my own career. I used to be the artist on New Warriors over at Marvel, and they were canceling that book. I came in not knowing that it was like literally like the issue I came in, they made the decision they were going to cancel. I came in issue 7, they were canceling with 10. But the idea was that series was going to end and they were going to launch into an Iron Fist series. Like it was the Iron Fist miniseries.
Okay.
So it was myself and Jay Ferber were going to work on it. We were going to transition from one thing immediately into Iron Fist. Somebody in the office said, Iron Fist won't sell by himself. We have to put Wolverine in. So it became an Iron Fist Wolverine miniseries. And then somewhere along the line between like finishing the script for issue 1 and starting issue 2, they decided that they needed even more characters. So suddenly Luke Cage was in it, and Captain America, and S.H.I.E.L.D., and Sunfire, and The Hand.
I thought you were going to say, and then they decided, we don't need Iron Fist.
Well, they were going to, they killed him in the story. They had taken the heart of the dragon out of him and put it in this other kid, and he was powerless, and he died briefly, and came back. Yeah, we did what we could, but that's an example of the idea that publishers were crossovers being a way to bolster the sales on something they don't think is going to have legs on its own.
Yeah. I think, from my own experience, because I've been involved in lots of crossovers that are kind of outside of of,
Yeah.
of the usual DC and Marvel
The
stuff.
stuff you wouldn't expect.
So, for example, one of the very first things I ever worked on was Total Eclipse, which was the Eclipse Comics line crossover, which made no sense whatsoever because you're putting Miracle Man next to Bean World, you know, and all kind of an air boy and stuff like that just didn't really belong together, and it was like trying to compose some sort of story that would hold together. And that I don't really think helped at all. Within Fables, when we got to around the issue 80, we'd reached a point where we had a companion title called Jack of Fables, and Jack of Fables was not selling as well as the main book. And so the idea was, well, let's have a crossover, the Great Fables crossover. And that way the readership of Jack will all jump on board, from Fables onto Jack, and it will be great. But what they did wrong was that instead of making Jack tonally like Fables, they made Fables tonally like Jack of Fables. So it actually had the reverse effect, that it actually brought Fables down instead of bringing Jack up. So, it's always a really dangerous path to walk when you go into these kind of projects, because you can actually undermine your successes rather than create success.
Yeah, I think the crossovers work the less you do them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? So, like, Secret Wars and Crisis came out, and everybody was like, they're all together. This is the coolest thing ever. But when you do it 16 times, it's not special anymore. It's it's like I always use the example of like Nirvana songs had quiet parts and loud parts, and the contrast between the two is what makes the song work, because you've got the contrast of those things together. When all you've got is the loud parts, it's not as attractive. And in a lot of ways, comics are all the loud parts now, right?
Yeah.
We do something succeeds, and we do too much of it, and we kill it. And like again, we kill that golden goose, so that you guys are like, oh Jesus, another crossover, rather than this is going to be cool because it's special. It's not special anymore.
And I think we're also kind of retreading a lot in that it's getting to the point now where we're on this nostalgia trail of crossovers that are tributes to crossovers.
You mean like, Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis?
I think that, for these things to really have value and to work, you need to bring something completely new to the game that's going to add a level, bring some richness to that universe that's going to last, something that people will think, oh, that was the point when this thing became part of this world, and resonates beyond it. And I think that the problem is it's also seen a little bit too much as a kind of a quick, let's press another restart button, because things have got fiddly and complicated again.
And the other thing, both companies I think have not been anywhere near as successful as they think they were going to be. Every time they did a crossover, they tried to introduce new characters, and very, very few of them immediately got used because people didn't necessarily know what to do with them or want to use them, and then they weren't catching on. And so they weren't properly launched. I mean, that goes as early as Crisis and Secret Wars. I mean, Jessica Carpenter, Spider-Woman pretty much didn't do much after that. Julia Carpenter, thank you. And, we had Harbinger out of Crisis, and after...
I think of DC's Bloodlines.
Yeah.
Where I think the only character that really had any legs was Hitman.
Yes, and that had more to do with the creators than the crossover.
It was like an 80 to 90% washout rate. Because frankly, most of the time when you're like, oh, you have to create a new character and put it in this story, you don't have enough time to actually create a character that somebody gives a damn about. So the ones that actually do stick around, Hitman, I just did a 0-hour anniversary special with Dan Jurgens, who down there or somewhere, with a busted finger. So, the books that came out of 0 Hour, that launched with 0 issues, Starman was the only one worth a damn,
Mhm.
and the only one that stuck around. Again, because James Robinson and Tony Harris were very much committed to that character. So, what were there, like 5 or 6? You know, so again, it's like an 80% washout rate.
The only one in my mind that's worked successfully was where we were planning it at the same time we were planning the crossover, which was Legends.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which was the immediate follow-up to Crisis that came out in 1986. But there,
Launch of Justice.
when Mike Gold comes in as a new editor at DC, and one of his first assignments was, you know, a revival of the Flash with Wally West, who got the mantle of the Flash at the end of Crisis a year earlier, and he was going to spin out of Legends, but it was already in development. And when we introduced the Suicide Squad as a piece of Legends, John Ostrander and I were already working on the comic to come out of that. The one that didn't work the best was probably Roy's redo on Shazam. It's like every time Roy wanted to do Shazam, it just never worked for some reason, even though that he was so affectionate. But we got the new Justice League really, you know, was the capstone there, because it was so totally different than what came before.
And that's when we
Oh, yes. But the lesson to take there is you plan for it.
Yeah.
You don't shove it in and say, you know, give me 4 new characters. You plan accordingly and make it part of the story, which is what we did with reforming the Justice League or introducing, you know, Task Force X. So, you know, one of the things about these crossovers is the tie-in issues. You know, a book may be at this level, kind of humming along, maybe, you know, wavering a little bit, and then there'd be the crossover issue, and it would spike. And of course, wouldn't sustain up here. And as soon as it was over, it always leveled off at a slightly higher level, which is what everyone's measure of success was. It was doing better than it did before. But the planning that has to go into that and to make it feel organic is the problem. What do you look at that?
Okay, so I was working on World of New Krypton and War of the Supermen, and when I was doing Supergirl, and the logistical nightmare of that series was evident from the beginning, because you had 4 creative teams basically all working at the same time. One of my issues with Supergirl, I had just come on the book like a couple of months before. I'm still finding my sea legs on this, but the issue of Action Comics where Supergirl's father Zor-El gets killed by not Metallo, Reactron. Is right before mine is like the follow-up immediately after. So I'm waiting for pages, but I can't wait for Pete Woods, but I can't wait for pages because I have a schedule that I have to keep myself. So one of the things that happens is I get my script, and you probably had an instant like I get my script, and it says that he's been, you know, Zor-El's looking down at his chest, and he's been shot in the chest, shot in the back from behind. So I draw my pages, I get them done, I hand them in, nobody says anything, and then I see Pete's pages, and Reactron is standing in front of Zor-El, shooting him through the chest, in the front, and not the back. But that wasn't the only incident of that kind of like, you're trying to coordinate with other artists who are all working at the same time. You're trying to coordinate with, the writers trying to coordinate with each other. And then editorial occasionally coming in and saying, whoops, we can't do that anymore, so we gotta scrap all of this. Like we were going to do, because there was 3 stages. We were doing World of New Krypton, which was going to lead into War of the Supermen. And War of the Supermen was supposed to be, when it was originally planned, it was supposed to be a 6-issue crossover with all these tie-ins. It got truncated to 4 weekly issues. So we had an entire issue where we were going to have Supergirl fighting Doomsday that got completely scrapped. There was a lot of stuff that during the Supergirl run that got scrapped. We were supposed to be part of Blackest Night as well, where Zor-El's corpse was supposed to rise from his crypt in an issue of Supergirl, and that got taken and put in the main series. And that just kind of left us scrambling, like trying to figure out what to do. So there's, you know, we've all had examples of stuff like that happen, you know, just logistically working on this.
But I mean, I was part of one that was actually quite successful within the Bat universe during my time on Batman, which was the earthquake in Gotham, followed by No Man's Land. And I think the reason that one worked so well, it was so tightly planned editorially going into it. And certainly, you know, with the earthquake story, everyone was very aware of what particular events were happening at each point. But you wouldn't, the characters weren't necessarily interacting, they were just responding to those events that were happening within Gotham City, and that worked really well. And then for the No Man's Land story that followed on from that, the second phase of that crossover, what was very clever was that they got teams, all the teams on the different books would be given story, and then the next team would get the next story, and you'd be doing 2 or 3 issues that would run across the books. So you'd be in 3 different books that month, and then the next team would be doing the story that would be crossing the titles that would follow that. So we weren't trying to maintain continuity between us, we were each just taking that next place in the story, and that was really successful. So I mean, you know, these things can work, it's just a question of making sure you know what you're doing going in.
Yeah, it's the dance behind the curtain that you guys never see.
Yeah.
You just know when we screw it up.
Yeah.
like if it goes as according to plan, you guys, well, that's what they're supposed to do. That's your job. But it's not, and it's frankly, it's not a skill that I think is really taught to editors enough. Because, like the 0-hour special that we just did, the editor was Brittany Holzer, and she's great. She's actually here.
Yeah.
And she'll be at the Orioles game in an hour or 2. Lucky her. And when we started the thing late. DC approved this 80-page story late. So we're like, oh shit, how are we going to get this thing out by August, which is when they wanted it? And Brittany was like, how do you do this? And so it was me and Dan Jurgens, and we danced this dance before. So it was like, all right, we'll split it up into 10-page chapters, and this guy has to draw before this guy. So, but at any point, if, you know, it's sort of this house of cards, and at any point, if like somebody draws a page out of order that's not being referenced to somebody else, then there's a redo. Then you have to pull it. But to the credit of Brittany and her assistant Chris Rosa and DC editorial as a whole, like that dance got done properly. And we were part and parcel of, you know, don't draw this page yet because Kelly Jones has to draw his page, and then you reference from that. But if you don't plan for that stuff, and if you don't get that stuff in front of everybody, we had 7 different artists working, it all falls apart because everybody's sort of siloed. All the artists are kind of siloed because they don't know what each other is doing unless someone gives them everybody else's stuff. So we had so we had a Dropbox where artists were putting their pages so everybody else could look at them.
That makes sense.
It's again, it's the behind the scenes stuff that you guys don't see, and you shouldn't see. You don't need to know how the books are made. You just want the book, right? But it's crossover.